and play on 2nd and 10. That's his youth right there.
Tagovailoa trying to make up for it. Fires to the end zone. Touchdown! Alabama wins!
Today I'll be filming my college football national championship prediction video and reacting some to the semifinals. This time I'm gonna go ahead and tell you who I'm picking in this game before I talk about the game. I'm picking Indiana. This Indiana team reminds me so much of the 2019 LSU team. And with coaching in this game, with the coordinators, I'd say it's pretty close, but Kirk Cincinnati is a better head coach than Mario Cristobal is. This Indiana team almost never makes mistakes. They have the second fewest penalty yards per game in the country, only averaging 25.6. And they have the third fewest turnovers in the country, only 8 this season. And they're also very good at forcing turnovers. They've got 29 takeaways, which is the third most in the country. And their turnover margin is the best in college football. They forced 3 turnovers against Oregon, which is why the game was a blowout. But Indiana would have won that game anyway. Now, Mario Cristobal is an elite recruiter and one of the best there is at coaching offensive lines. But Kirk Cincinnati is a much better game time coach and better at player development. Now, Miami's offensive line played well against Ole Miss with opening up room for Mark Fletcher to run. He ran for 133 yards and averaged 6 yards per carry. But a concern for this Miami offensive line against Indiana is they did struggle some with that Ole Miss pass rush. They gave up 4 sacks, and Ole Miss they've got some good pass rushers. Centurion Perkins, Will Eccles, and Princewell Amani Allen, but their pass rush isn't near as strong as Indiana's is. Indiana, I think, is going to sack Carson Beck 3 or 4 times in this game. And another concern for this Miami offensive line is penalties, because those have been a big problem for them this season, including in the Ole Miss game. And to beat Indiana, you're going to have to play a very clean game. And as good as this Miami offensive line is, Indiana's is even better. They pushed around Oregon. They ran for 185 yards and only gave up 1 sack. Now, Miami has a better pass rush than Oregon it does, but Ole Miss was able to protect Chambliss well in that game. Miami only got 1 sack, and neither Ruben Bain or Hakeem Messidor was able to get much pressure. I think Indiana is going to be able to limit this Miami pass rush, and Carson Beck, though, played probably his best game of the season against Ole Miss, and this isn't criticizing him. He's played very well for the most part this season, but in this Ole Miss game, he was making one great throw after another. He threw for 268 and 2 touchdowns. And Miami is going to need him to play like that to have a chance in this game because Indiana is going to slow down their run game. I think. Now, Miami does have the best offensive line that Indiana will have faced this season. So I do think Miami will still get over 100 yards rushing. I do think Mark Fletcher will get one explosive run, but Ole Miss scored more on Miami than anyone else has this season. And I'll go ahead and tell you that if Indiana gets to 27 points, they're going to win for sure. Because Indiana's defense is a whole lot better than Ole Miss's is. But Miami's only chance is going to be if they're able to keep it very low scoring. But Ole Miss moved the ball pretty well on Miami. Trinidad Chambliss picked apart this Miami secondary for most of the game. He threw for 277 yards. And I think Fernando Mendoza is going to pick them apart too. And even though Dante Moore had a lot more yards than Fernando Mendoza did, if you actually watched the game like I did, you know that Mendoza outplayed Moore by a lot. Even though Mendoza only had 177 yards passing, that's because he only threw 20 times because their run game was so good. But he completed 85% of his passes and threw 5 touchdown passes and averaged a really good 8.9 yards per throw. And Dante Moore, he got 285 yards passing in that game, but that was just because Indiana gave up some big passing plays in garbage time. And I do trust that Fernando Mendoza more than I do Carson Beck. I think Carson Beck will probably throw a costly interception in this game. And I think this Indiana secondary is able to hold him under 200 yards of passing. Indiana's secondary is even better than Miami's is. And if you're Carson Beck, you want to avoid throwing to D'Angelo Pons' side because not only is he a lockdown corner, he had a pick six against Oregon. And Ole Miss wasn't able to shut down Malachi Tony. He had a big game of 5 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown.
Quick to Malachi Tony, one of the most explosive players in football. He breaks through. Malachi Tony to the crib.
But I think Indiana will be able to shut him down. Now there's still Khalil Marion for Indiana to worry about because he had a huge game against Ole Miss, 7 catches for 114 yards and a touch down. But like I said with Mario Cristobal about coaching offensive lines, the same thing goes for Kirk Cinetti when it comes to coaching wide receivers. He's one of the best there is at it. And Elijah Surratt, I think, is just as good of a wide receiver as Malachi Tony is. I think Surratt is going to be a second round pick. And Omar Cooper, I think, is better than the Miami wide receivers besides Tony. And Charlie Becker didn't have a huge regular season, but he has really come on for Indiana in the Big Ten championship and the playoff games.
Brought him to James Madison in the portal where he excelled. Now he's a Hoosier. Deep throw, Charlie Becker!
Neither team uses tight ends much for pass catching, but the difference in the Miami Ole Miss game really was that Miami was a whole lot better on third down than Ole Miss was. And teams like to bring pressure the most on third down. And while Indiana doesn't have a pass rusher quite as good as Ruben Bain, Miami is mainly just Ruben Bain and Akeem Messidor for their pass rush. And that's not criticizing them. Ruben Bain and Akeem Messidor are the best combination of two pass rushers in college football this season. But Indiana, they're good pass rushers. Tyreek Tucker, Mikael Kamara, Elijah Hardy, and Isaiah Jones combined are an even stronger pass rush than Ruben Bain and Akeem Masadora. Now, Miami has been close to as good at stopping the run as Indiana has. They've been giving up on average at 86.5 rushing yards per game, and Indiana's only giving up 75 per game. And against Ole Miss, besides the 73-yard touchdown run by Kaiwan Lacey, Miami did do a good job against the run. And I think Miami will do better at stopping Indiana's run game than Oregon did. But I still don't think they're going to come anywhere close to shutting it down. I still think Indiana runs for around 150 yards in this game. Indiana's top two running backs, Roman Henby and Kaelon Black, are both about as good as Miami's Mark Fletcher is. And Fernando Mendoza is a much bigger threat with his legs than Carson Beck is. I think Miami is able to keep it close for most of the game, but I think Indiana pulls away in the fourth quarter and wins pretty big. I've got Indiana 30, Miami 13. So that'll be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.